Hey guys, I think this is going to be more of a public service announcement than my typical long form review video, but every now and again I get somebody asking me in the comments if they can take a particular power station on a plane with them. And the answer to that question is invariably a resounding no. And that's because the FAA has very specific constraints on what kinds of batteries are permitted and at what capacity. And even the smallest power stations that are available today are going to exceed those limits. And on top of that, in case you weren't aware, relatively recently FAA rules changed, and that means that you can't even put small lithium-based batteries, including USB power banks, in your checked-in bags now. They have to actually be in your carry-on bag in the passenger cabin with you. And they even have limits on the total combined capacity that they'll allow you to bring on. And so a couple of months back when I was planning for my Southwest US trip, that's New Mexico and Arizona specifically, I started looking into what the rules actually are to see if I could find something that would get me the most capacity and utility while still being permitted on the plane with me. So accordingly, I did have some very specific criteria that I needed to satisfy. And so first and foremost, whatever I was going to buy had to be within the allowable TSA requirements so that I could travel with it. And next, I wanted something that was compact and light enough to easily be carried in a day pack, because I do a lot of day hiking. And finally, I wanted the ability to be able to fast charge my laptop, my tablet, and both me and my wife's phones. Now, I already have several of these cheap run-of-the-mill kind of cheapo power banks like this guy right here. And the issue I have with these is that they don't really output enough power to allow me to charge my laptop, at least not anything resembling fast charging. And since they all pretty much are capped at 18 watts or worse, and despite their capacity claims, they don't seem to provide anywhere near their rated capacity spec. And they also tend to be fairly slow to recharge, taking several hours or more to top these things back off. So after poking around on Amazon for a while, I found this guy right here. It's called the X100 Super Power Bank. And it caught my eye for a variety of reasons, but more on that in a minute. But typically capacity specs for these USB power banks, they're expressed in milliamp hours instead of watt hours. And that's because they tend to have a variable voltage output depending on what they're actually charging. And so the usable watt hours will vary with that output voltage. And like I said, what I've found in all of these cheapo power banks that I've bought in the past, and this one in particular is a 30,000 milliamp hour, it claims to be, at least that's what they say. These are extremely inefficient, and as a result, the spec capacity is often not even remotely close to what you'd actually get out of it. And it's not uncommon for these cheap power banks to actually provide maybe half of what they actually claim, at least in the way that most people use them. And so this X100 really piqued my curiosity because they claim that this unit is extremely and significantly more efficient than these other types of power banks. And as a result, it should give you significantly more usable capacity. So I thought I'd give it a try and see if that was actually true or maybe just some marketing hype. And we'll get to the results here shortly. All right, let's take a closer look at this X100. You can see it does come with this little soft carrying pouch if you need to store it, with a little side pocket for cables, presumably. And unlike a typical USB power bank, this thing actually requires, if you really want to use all the features that it's got, it requires a little manual here. And it's got a pretty nice user guide, color user guide here. And there's a lot going on. And let's talk about that, because this little LED display here on the front lets you get access to a variety of things. As you can see, it's got this sort of clear, like transparent polycarbonate shell around it with, I believe, aluminum caps on it. And believe it or not, this thing is IP66 waterproof rated. So that doesn't mean that you can drop it into a pool, though you might be able to get away with that. But you can definitely leave this out in the rain, in a hard rain at that, even with these exposed ports, the XT30 on this side and the two Type-Cs on this side. And it should be perfectly capable of handling that without any damage to the unit. Now on the top part here, if you can see the left C1 Type-C port, this is a PD 65 watt. The one on the right is the C2 port, and it is both an in and an out. And you can configure how it behaves in the little display, which I'll show you in a minute. But this one is a 140 watt PD 140 watt port. So you can charge this thing at 140 watts, or very close to it, and you can discharge this thing at 140 watts. And this is what really piqued my interest, because I wanted something that I could fast charge my MacBook Pro with on the go. And that's the port I used to do it. All right, and then of course, as I mentioned, you've got this XT30 port here on the bottom, and the total output, max output of this is 315 watts. So yeah, let me zoom in here and we'll take a look at the screen. So I'm currently sitting at 16% there on the battery status, and I'm gonna go ahead and connect the in and out port here to a 140 watt charging source. And by the way, if you're not aware, in order to charge at maximum speed, you do need a cable that's rated for 140 watts. And of course, the device you're charging has to be capable of handling 140 watts. And then the device you're using to charge the unit has to be capable of outputting 140 watts. So there's really three things that have to line up there. So I mean, if you're using just a regular wall outlet, you could use something like this, maybe not this particular one. I think this one maxes out at maybe 60 watts, but they make various versions of this that will output, 140 watts. I'm actually using a power station. But if we take a look here, you can see we're actually charging at 126.3 watts. And that's outstanding. And that's handy because this thing has a lot of capacity. Unlike your typical sort of, USB power bank like this that claims to have 30,000 milliamp hours of capacity, it just is not the same. Very fast charging capability to get this thing topped off quickly if you have a 140 watt charger. But let me go ahead and take the other side of that USB cable out. All right, so I got my phone, and let's just see what my phone says when I plug it into this. All right, it says super fast charging, 1 hour until full, and I'm at 10% right now on my phone. Let's take a look at some of the configuration options on here. As I mentioned, you can navigate with just this one single button here. So when you press the button once, it will select one of these tiles. And the only way you'll know that is the tile will be slightly larger. And so if you just keep single pressing, it's actually cycling through. I'm on the DC output now, and now I'm on C1 and C2, and then the battery. So if I go back to that first tile, which is the LED, if I long press, how long I hold it, you can see the LMs are counting up. That's the lumens. That will determine how bright the LED light will come on when I turn it on, which is extremely bright. So if I don't hold it as long, in fact, I'm going to long press and I can turn it off. Now, if you turn it on, make it not quite as bright this time. If I'm going to other tiles, it'll actually turn off the LED light momentarily, just to allow me to see the display, right? So I'm gonna go back to the LED tile and long press just to turn that off. So there isn't a very bright LED in there, just in case you need it. All right, so if I go over to the DC output here, I can long press that to turn on the DC output. And it'll tell me now that that is now set up for, let's see, we're down to 20.76 volts, and that's at 19%. So as I mentioned, the voltage does drop on that XT30 port as the state of charge goes down. Let me just long press that to shut it off. Actually, I have to select it first and then long press. Now that's turned off. We can take a look at the C2, which is configurable here. I can actually long press that, and I've basically forced it into output only mode. So if I wanted to connect this to another power bank to charge that other power bank, this is the way that I can ensure that it's going to output power and not try to take power from the other power bank, since this C2 port is an in and an out port. So that's one way that you can do that. So I'm going to select it again, long press it to go back to off. And in the off mode, like you saw, it'll automatically turn itself on when you plug it in and try to detect whether it's supposed to be in or out. So if I go over to the battery tile, which is the big one, I can double tap. So this will allow me to see the current voltage and amperage output of all 6 of the cells in this little battery pack. I don't know who needs to see that, but it's kind of interesting that you can do that. It's almost like Edge turned their engineers loose and said, just have fun. And the engineers are like, well, why not? We did it because we can. So there's all kinds of cool stuff in there. So just kind of tooling around here. Let me go back to that LED light. If I double click here, double press, it'll open the options for that LED light. since the LED light was highlighted. So this is where you can turn it on to like SOS mode. There's a variety of modes in there that you can do. And if I want to back out of that menu, I'll just double click back out of it. If I wait just a second for that tile to go unselected, which I think it just did, if I double click now, it should bring up these system settings. So this is where you can set things like the auto shut off timeout, which I currently have to 45 seconds. I can set the charging power if I want to make sure that maybe I want to limit the charging power. Right now, the max charging power is set to 139 watts, but you can get in there and alter all that. And this handy little user guide right here will kind of describe what all those little parameters do. So I don't know how often people would get in and mess with that, but it's really kind of cool that you have the option to get in and play with this, because this is really like a DC power station with 2 Type-C ports and an XT30. Just very cool. And the fact that I can actually take this on a plane is super handy. All right, of course, the main use case for me is fast charging my MacBook. And you can see up here, if I zoom in, very low battery. I'm at 13% right now. So let's go ahead and plug this in. I'm going to use the MacBook's normal charge cable, go into the C2, which is the 140 watt, and I'll turn it on. We should be able to see up there an update. So we are now charging. And if I try to zoom in here on this display, we can see that we're charging down here at 131 watts, which is fantastic to get out of a portable USB battery bank like this. So I'll be able to top this off in about an hour. And you can actually charge this with a 140 watt source in well under an hour, just maybe a little about 40 minutes or so, fully charge this off. And this is about, I think they rate this at 97 watt hours. But this X100 will give me a full charge on my MacBook Pro from 13% and still probably have about 10 or 15% charge left over in the X100. And that is exactly what I want. I'm already at 15%. So for me, this was the big deliverable, and it did deliver. And like I said, these cheap power banks typically max out on the output at something like 18 watts most often, which is passable for phone charging if you're doing it overnight, I guess, but not great if you need a quick top off. And if you wanted to charge a laptop, you're going to be charging extremely slowly or not at all. And this little XT30 output here on the back got me to thinking about how I might be able to take advantage of that. And one thing that I was hoping I could do with it would be to run a DC fridge for at least maybe a few hours, because I checked the voltage on this and it did read in at just a little over 24 volts, and that's compatible with most portable DC fridges. So I actually went out and bought the adapters to test this thing, and it actually does run a DC fridge, but only for an hour or two before the voltage eventually drops and the fridge goes into battery protection mode, because as it turns out, this little XT30 port on this unit is really designed to sustain only about 21.6 volts. And that's for compatibility with things like FPV drone and RC car batteries and things like that. So after an hour or two of running a DC fridge at 24 volts, it drops down to 21.6, and the fridge thinks it's running your car battery down, and it shuts off to protect it due to that low voltage. So as it turned out, unfortunately, the DC fridge thing is not a use case that's really practical for this X100. But hey, if you guys can think of any other possible use cases for this XT30 output, I'd be very interested to know if you could leave those in the comment section below, because I'd be definitely interested in trying to explore those options further, because I'm trying to find other ways that I can use this. But in any case, this X100 is definitely not cheap. It's currently selling for, I think, for about $129, which is actually a fair amount less than I bought it several months ago. I think it was $169 at that time. But what I wanted to find out is, will this actually fast charge my MacBook Pro, charge it fully, and does the super power bank with its rated 19,400 milliamp hours actually provide significantly more usable capacity than these cheap power banks that claim 30,000 milliamp hours? And as it turns out, the answers to those questions are yes, it actually does. It actually does charge my MacBook Pro at very near 140 watts. In fact, depending on my state of charge, it actually gets to, I think, 138 watts. And it will charge it fully, leaving just a little bit of charge left in the X100 after that. And then I spent nearly a full week after that using the X100 to recharge my Samsung S23 Ultra phone, and then comparing that experience to charging it with this power bank right here. And the differences were pretty significant. With this generic power bank that claims 30,000 milliamp hours, and by the way, this is only a few months old, so it's not like this is a 5-year-old power bank. It's only like 6 months max. I was able to charge my phone about 2.5 times with this power bank, from about 10 or 15% up to 100%. But with the X100, I was actually able to fast charge my phone about 5.25 times. And that's pretty remarkable when you consider that this X100 is rated at 19,400 milliamp hours, or what the box says is 97 watt hours, and not 30,000 milliamp hours like this thing claims. So it would seem that the claims on this thing that it's much higher efficiency are definitely not just marketing hype. It's kind of like having, 2 or more of these cheap power banks, but also getting super fast charging as a bonus. And considering that it does cost 129 bucks, you would certainly hope that it's bringing something extra to the table, but it definitely does. But as many of you will no doubt agree, the cheapest tool is not always the best tool for the job. So if you're in the market for some packable recharge power, and especially if you happen to be traveling by plane, I think this X100 is some extremely handy travel tech, especially if you travel with electronics like laptops, tablets, phones, cameras, and drones like me and my wife do. Now, when it comes to recharging the X100, you can definitely recharge it from just a standard USB port in a car, but that's going to be pretty slow because in most cases, those are going to be topped out at around somewhere between 12 and 18 watts at best. So for car charging, you're probably better off picking up a cheap 12-volt USB car charger that does like PD 60 watt output or higher, that's got a Type-C connector on it. Those are pretty easy to find. They're not very expensive. And that's what we did. And I was able to keep this thing topped off pretty much all the time just while using the rental car during our Southwest trip. And then obviously having a small USB charger for wall charging, something like this that's got a PD 60 watt or higher output, is another nice option to have in your travel kit since they don't take up much room. And per usual, I will leave the Amazon link to this little beast down in the description below, along with some options for other USB car charging and wall charging options that I found useful. And if you want to go check those out, you'll find those down in the description below. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Hopefully you found something useful or informative in some way, despite the fact that this admittedly is a slight departure from my usual topics. And if you did, I'd very much appreciate it if you would click that like button down below for me. And thanks for joining me in this video. And hey, maybe poke around on the other videos on my channel, see if there's some other stuff there that you might find helpful, and then come back and join me for the next one. Until then, have fun out there.